Chapter 8. Mud skidded to a stop in front of the collapsed house. Stonefist lay unconscious in the rubble, surrounded by crackling flames. Billows of acrid black smoke filled the air, stinging Mud's throat and making him cough. Waves of heat beat against him. "Father!" Green Thumb screamed. He raced across the street and dived toward the fire. A couple of older dwarves caught him and pulled him away, calling for buckets and water. No time for that. Mud dropped his pack and laid his bow aside. He unfastened his water skin and dumped the contents over himself, soaking his clothes and cloak. Drawing the wet cloak close to protect himself from the fire, he raced to the fallen dwarf. Heat seared his lungs and burned his feet. As the flames surrounded him, his mind flashed back to the fire at Vernash's keep, where he lost Hector. Flames raced up the third-level stairs behind him, consuming everything in their path. "Hector!" Mud cried. He wrapped his arms around his fallen friend and dragged him out of the fire. "What are you doing?" Hera's shrill voice snapped him back to the present. He lowered the burned dwarf to the ground. It wasn't Hector. He couldn't go back in time and save his friend. At least he got the dwarf out. A slap of cold water hit Mud in the face. Only then did he realize his cloak had dried in the heat and had started to burn. Green Thumb raced to his father's side, followed by other dwarves. "Help!" A plaintive cry sounded above the roaring flames. "Mud, look!" Hera grabbed his arm and pointed to the second-floor balcony of a wooden house across the street. A tiny dwarf child stood on the balcony. Flames licked out the doorway behind him. In a moment the whole building would collapse. The other dwarves watched in horror. "My little boy!" one of them screamed. Mud's gaze swept the street, looking for some way to get up the balcony. "Don't even think of going into that house," Hera said. "You'd be dead before you reached the stairs." Mud pulled away from her grasp and drew his sword. "What are you doing?" she cried again. "You can't fight fire with sword." Ignoring her, Mud raced to the light bulb at the side of the street. Judging the distance and the angle to the burning house, Mud chopped at the base of the thick wooden pole with his sword. A sliver of wood chipped away, then a second. "Here, lad." A burly dwarf pressed an axe into his hands. Mud hefted the axe, getting a feel for the weapon to make sure he hit the pole just right before he swung. The dwarf's boy cried for help and turned into a scream. Mud slammed the axe into the pole. Wood creaked, and the pole tipped, then fell, crashing against the balcony. Mud dropped the axe and ran up the pole to the burning house. He snatched the child from the balcony and raced back toward the ground. The house collapsed before he was halfway down. Wood thundered upon wood and roaring fire. The bowl vanished from beneath his feet. Mud wrapped his arms around the child and tucked into a roll as he hit the ground. He came to his feet, breathless, and set the child down. The dwarves crowded around, patting Mud on the back and cheering. The mother swooped her toddler up, hugging him and kissing his cheek. Mud looked from the child to Stonefist Drakecutter. A dwarf cleric knelt beside the old dwarf, working feverishly to keep him alive. Stonefist's body was so burned the healer might not be able to save him. The dwarves muttered and shook their heads. Mud gripped the parchment in his pocket. Stonefist had to live. Mud needed him to look at Shannara's drawing. Mud tore his gaze away from them and stared into the collapsed house. The fire still raged, snapping and smoking. Its heat licked Mud's cheeks. He stepped closer to the fire, thinking of Hector. Hera pulled him away from the burning house. "You're hurt, Mud. Come over and let the healer look at you." Mud shook Hera off and strode to where the cleric and Green Thumb knelt, next to Stonefist. "Can you save him, Takil?" Green Thumb asked the healer. The healer, a cleric of Mishkael, clutched the goddess's holy emblem in his hands. "It will take a miracle." He bowed his head again in prayer, pleading to Mishkael for Stonefist's life. Mud waited in silence, fingering the parchment. The healer flinched, then looked straight at Green Thumb. "Your father made a pact with Riox. Mishkael can't interfere. Whether he lives or dies depends on what becomes of his axe." "It's gone," Green Thumb said through gritted teeth. "Stolen by the dragon, I think." A look of resignation spread across Takil's face. "Then the best I can do is make him comfortable until his soul passes from this world." Mud pulled his hand from the parchment in his pocket, disappointed. Green Thumb jumped to his feet. "What if I find the axe and bring it back?" Takil gaped. "You're going to hunt a red dragon?" "Yes, if that's what it takes to save my father." Green Thumb stared at the mountains where the dragon had gone. "You better do it quickly then," the healer said. "Stonefist doesn't have much time." End of Chapter 8.